My name's Aileen Barrett, and I am delighted to be moderating this session today. This started a series, I guess we're into year 3, if not 4 by now. And I think throughout that time, what we are building and growing is this community of early career researchers. And I think by introducing things, I think like most of us, I'm sure for some of you as well, we kind of fall into health professions education almost accidentally. I've never yet met a teenager who, when you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, they've said, I want to be a medical educator. So I think we all kind of discover this along the way. And so finding our tribe and finding that community can be quite difficult. And I think that's what I love about this particular series, and particularly about the incubator. So I've been involved with the incubator for a few years now, and I think to watch that number of people growing, but to watch what people are sharing with each other, the networks that people are actually starting to create, and those collaborations that are starting to come out of these types of initiatives as well, is just so heartening to see as well. And hopefully it will rub off on our students now, who will kind of come into their careers with a view to engaging in health professions education that bit earlier than some of us did as well. I love to think of myself as an early career researcher at the later part of my career. So, why not? It would be great. But it would be lovely to see people coming in with a view to engaging in education as well. I am currently an assistant scheme director for GP training here in the Southeast in Ireland, a very stormy Southeast today. I'm also the academic lead for research at the College of GPs, but finishing up in that role next week and starting a role at the University of Galway in January as senior lecturer in medical education. So I'm really excited to be back in the med ed fold as well. But I get to combine my postgraduate teaching, educational research interests, and my supervision and collaboration opportunities all the time. And that's why I'm particularly delighted to welcome Amy today, because I've known Amy for a couple of years. We've run into each other at so many different bits and pieces. And Amy spent some time in Queen's in Belfast as well. So she'll tell you a bit more about that, I'm sure. But Amy's now an assistant professor in medical education at Norwich Medical School. And so I was delighted to hear she was going to be delivering this session today. I know Amy's very keen for this to be interactive. And as with all of these sessions, and I really can't stress this enough, the more engaging it is in terms of you asking questions, getting what you need out of this will actually be so beneficial for everybody. There is no such thing as a silly question. There is no such thing as a basic question when it comes to particularly around choosing methodologies. It's a particularly difficult area for students to grasp when they come to health professions education research. And so don't leave today with any burning questions. Make sure you either pop them in the chat box, or if you feel that you can, just pop on your mic and just interrupt us as we go along. So I'm going to hand over, Amy. You'll introduce yourself a lot better than I will, but I'm really excited to hear this today as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Aileen, and welcome everyone to the session. So my name is Amy Wong. I'm the Associate Professor in Medical Education, as well as the Faculty Development Lead for the medical school. And as Aileen said, I'm accidentally I went into the health profession education. I'm originally trained as a high school teacher, but started with in the university with the medical school and with nursing and midwifery, both in Australia and in the UK for the last 15 years. And I'm very delighted to support students, particularly in pursuing educational and clinical research. So today's topic is about choosing methodology, and I'm very, very keen for you to involve in the presentation. I've always believed that I don't know all the answer, and we co-create the knowledge about choosing methodology in the next hour, half an hour or so. So let's get started. So this is the overview of our session. So explore the differences between methodology and methods, discuss the reasons for choosing the appropriate methodology, and I would like to introduce the 6-step approach to guide your choice of an appropriate methodology. And we probably would like to have some time at the end for you to discuss the methodology that you may use for your project. So first of all, let's do a little quick poll. What are the 3 words or short phrases that come to mind when you think about methodology? So I will just switch the screen so that we can go in. to the web version. Right. So I'll give you a few moments to scan the QR code, and then I will start the poll.
Amy, mine isn't linking directly to a specific one, but I wonder if that's the same for everyone. It might just be mine.
No, it's just that I give people a few seconds to scan the code,
Yeah.
and then I will start.
Oh, perfect.
So 3 words or short phrases that come to mind when you think about the word methodology. Yep, that's okay. I've no idea what I'm doing, and that's the reason why we are here today to talk about methodology. Yep, so we've got methodologies about study design, about research paradigm, validity, robustness, research paradigm as well, methods, design, data, the world view, how to ensure that it is congruent, methods approach. Any more coming? Philosophy, yes, that's great. Analysis and alignment. Alignment to outcomes, to the methods. Yep. Thank you very much for all your participation. Actually, all your responses touched a little bit about different aspects of methodology. So let me just stop sharing and go back to my presentation to continue our discussion. So I've saw that methods is coming up. What I'm sharing. That one. So I saw that methods has coming up in your responses. So what are the differences between methods and methodology? Aileen, you probably need to help me to look at the chat because I can't see the chat when I'm sharing the screen. So what are the differences between methods and methodology? Anyone?
Just pop some ideas into the chat box.
Or you can turn on your mic.
I would need to allow them to do those, not at the moment yet. Or I can unmute everyone if you want me.
You mean putting it put responses into the chat?
Yeah, probably it's better at this point.
Yep. Okay. That's okay. So let's have a look. What is methodology and the differences between methodology and methods? So when we talk about methodology, we're not just talking about the tools that we use. Methodology is a theoretical analysis of methods. What does that mean? It's actually about the principles and theories that guide your research approach. Think of methodology, something like a blueprint, the reasoning, the why behind how you plan to investigate your question. For example, if you adopt a qualitative approach to understand subjective experiences, that choice actually reflects your methodology. It is not just about doing interviews, it is about why interviews make sense to answer your research question. So there needs to be alignment between your methodology and your research question. So the focus of methodology is the why behind your choices. Why did you choose qualitative rather than quantitative? Why interpret meanings rather than measuring variables? And your methodology help you to design a logical framework that guiding those decisions of choosing the right methodology to answer your research question. Okay, so methodology is about your research philosophy and strategies. It's not about the steps that you will take. Methodology bridge between your research question and the methods that you will use. So you can see that methodology is pretty much the underlying theoretical analysis of your methods that align to your research question. So now we have talked about methodology, the big picture. So what are the differences to methods? So methods are the practical step that you take to collect and analyze data. So it refers to a specific technique or research or procedures that you use in your research. What you actually do to collect the data, to collect the information. For example, using a questionnaire to collect responses from participants is a method. Another qualitative methods could be conducting interviews or focus groups. These are all methods. The difference between method and methodology is related to why, method is related to how you do the research, how you will collect your data, how will you analyze your data. Turning your methodology into actual steps, actual action. So methodology is the strategy and the reason, and methods are the tools and the techniques, and they work together with the aim to answer your research question. So anyone have any questions about the differences between methodology and method?
Amy, Kabir has just asked, can we include research paradigms in methodology?
Yes, that's the next slide. I'll talk about that. Thank you, Aileen. So before we're talking about the research paradigm, why we need to choose the appropriate methodology? Anyone? Why we need to, you all need to think about methodology in your research project. Why it is important to think about that? Or find the right methodology aligned to your research question.
So Jenna has just said, so that what you do in your research answers the questions that you're asking. And Natasha said it's important to assure that the methodology aligns with the worldview. And Kabir said to frame the research question in the context-based framework.
Excellent, thank you. So it helps us to increase the credibility of the findings of our research. It also informs how we collect the data and guide us to how to interpret your data. And very importantly, choosing the right methods aligning to your research question and answering to your research question. So let's have a look at the 6-step approach to guide your choice of an appropriate methodology. And we'll go through this step in details in this session. So first of all, you need to think about what is your research paradigm. Second, what is the appropriate approach that you're going to choose, which involve how many methods will be used in your research project, thinking about what sort of data that will be collected, and as well as the methodological strategy, and how often are you going to collect the data for your project. So before we dive into methodology and methods, it is very important to understand the bigger picture of research paradigm or research philosophy. And this diagram guides you, show you the logical flow of ideas that underpin any research project. Don't be afraid of these big words. And to be honest, I can't really pronounce some of the words correctly. So bear with me with my pronunciation. But it's very important that we can think about that and actually explain it in simple terms. So first of all is the axiology. What does that mean? What do we value? So thinking about the role of values in research. So thinking about you as a researcher, for example, do you value objectivity or do you prioritize lived experiences? So this different role of values will have a direct impact of whether you choose to do a quantitative or qualitative research. The second is ontology. What is out there to know? So it is about the nature of reality. Are you as a researcher assuming that there is one objective truth, or are you thinking that there are multiple realities shaped by your participants or shaped by different stakeholders? Then you also need to think about epistemology, which is mean by what and how can we know about it? And this is about knowledge. How we justify what we think is true. So for example, do you believe knowledge comes from measurable facts? Or do you think knowledge is coming from interpretation and meaning? And that differences would also help you or determine whether you do a quantitative or qualitative research. Then we go to the methodology, what we briefly talk about. How can we go about acquiring the knowledge? So the overall approach that you choose, like quantitative or qualitative, or you choose a mixed method. And that is the bridge between what we talk about the philosophical stance as a researcher and the practical step. Then we have the methods. What actually the step that are we going to collect the data to inform the knowledge? So this is where you decide whether you use interviews, focus group for qualitative research, or surveys or experiments for quantitative research. And finally, sources. Which data can we collect? So are we collecting data from participants? Are we looking through data sets or documents? So step one is thinking about your research paradigm, and it is shaped by your values, your view of reality, and your understanding of knowledge, together with the approach that you're going to take to collect your data. Any questions about step one, about research paradigm? So let's have a look at step two. What is the appropriate approach? So when we design research, we often think about how theory and data interact. And there are three main reasoning approaches: deductive, inductive, and abductive. Each have a different starting point and a different purpose. So let's have a look at deductive reasoning. So it's actually start with a hypothesis derived from the theory. You then test it through empirical observation or experiment. And this approach is common in research that aims to measure or test some predefined concepts. For example, if theory suggested that stress reduces productivity, then you may design a study to test that hypothesis. On the other hand, inductive, flip that around, is all usually begin with observations and looks for patterns. And eventually, when you look at the patterns that you collect, the data that you collect, and forming new theories, which is ideal when we're doing exploratory research, where there is no theories established yet. Give you an example. So if you observe how people behave in a new healthcare setting, you may develop a theory based on those patterns. And the last one, the adaptive reasoning, is actually combine both observation and theory to create an explanation. And it is usually used by research that seek to explain complex phenomena, and either the deductive or inductive would be comprehensive enough to explain situation. So in general, deductive start with the theory, inductive start with the data, and abductive move back and forth between the both to make sense of the complexity of the phenomenon. And choosing the right approach, again, depends on your research question and your context. So we think about research paradigm, we've decided the appropriate approach, then we need to think about how many methods will be used. So do we only focus on one method, several methods, or combine different perspectives? There's where three terms come in: the mono, the multi, and the mixed. So the mono means single and focused. You only use one approach, either qualitative or quantitative, to explore your research question. For example, conducting interviews only or survey only. Multi means looking at multiple different elements of a phenomenon, but still within one methodological tradition or approach. Give you an example, you may use several qualitative techniques. So for example, interviews and focus group to get a more comprehensive understanding of the participants of your research, which is different from mixed. Mixed is actually integrating qualitative and quantitative approaches. And the part of qualitative or quantitative part of your research needs to inform each other. So for example, if you decided to give a survey to your participants, the outcome, the findings of your survey in a mixed method would need to inform the interview questions or focus group questions. They are not two separate parts of your research. They need to inform each other. And it gives you a comprehensive understanding of your research problem. So in my example, the survey will give you the breadth and the interview will give you the depth of the knowledge or the data. And again, very importantly, your choice depends on your research question and the depth of understanding that you will need to answer your research question. So research paradigm, the appropriate approach, and the number of methods. Then we talk about what sort of data will be collected. So in general, there are two types of data, qualitative and quantitative. So for qualitative data, the purpose is really to explore, to understand, and to interpret the data that you collected from your participants. And the research question usually start with how or why something happened. And as I mentioned it before, usually for qualitative data collection, the methods that we'll use will be interviews or focus groups. And we aim to identify the patterns or themes using an inductive approach and building knowledge or theories based on the collected data. On the other hand, quantitative the purpose is to measure and quantify variables. So the research questions will look like something: to what extent does X impact on Y? Stress impact on productivity, the example that I've talked about before. What's the relationship between A and B? And the methods that we use, usually surveys, tests, or some structured observation. And researchers doing quantitative research usually conduct statistical analysis based on the data collected and using a deductive approach, testing the hypothesis that they set up at the beginning of their research against the data to see either confirm or reject their hypothesis. So now we have an idea of what sort of data will be collected. Then we'll have a look. So there are two mainstream of different type of research. So the quantitative research and the qualitative research. Okay, that's the overall approach. And these are two broad categories. So in general, quantitative research is about measurement and relationship. They usually use a systematic attempt to define, measure, and report on the connections between different variables. So thinking about numbers, statistical analysis, testing hypothesis. So for qualitative research, on the other hand, focuses on the participants' experience. It explores how people interpret their world on a particular subject matter. And there are several strategies within qualitative research, and each with a different purpose that I would like to briefly talk about. So phenomenology, it aims to interpret the participants' lived experience, how they perceive and making sense of a phenomenon. And we can also use case studies. We can single or multiple studies, and case studies could be just descriptive or exploratory, try to explore the relationship, or try to explain situation. And using case studies really give you the examples to dive deep into a specific context or situation. We can also use grounded theory to develop a new theoretical model based on the participants' experiences and perspective. It is about, like the term, building a theory from the ground up. Ethnography is about immersing yourself in a social or cultural setting to understand complex interactions, and is usually over a longer period of time. It is about observing and engaging with participants in their real-world contexts. The last one is the general qualitative inquiry. Is more flexible, is used varied data collection strategies to explore participants' experience, the perceptions or interpretations without being tied to a specific approach. So in summary, quantitative research answers how much and what's the relationship, while qualitative research really answered the questions of how and why. Very importantly, as I stress it, highlighted in a few times, your choice of methodological strategies need to align with your research question. That comes to the step 6. How often will you collect data? Are you planning to do a cross-sectional study? So data collected at one specific time? Or are you planning to do a longitudinal study? So you collect data repeatedly over time. So this concludes our 6-step approach to guide your choice of an appropriate methodology. Any question?
Amy, somebody's asked, what's the difference between phenomenology and general qualitative inquiry? Is it the depth?
Yeah, definitely would be the depth. And then with the general qualitative inquiry, you can use a combination of different qualitative approach, not necessarily stick to the ethnography as a single approach.
Yeah, and the phenomenology is quite it definitely requires a lot of reading around, doesn't it? I've done one phenomenological study, and it's actually quite difficult to kind of wrap your head around what exactly you're trying to elicit from participants around that lived experience as well. And I think part of it is probably not only the depth in terms of what you're asking about, and really trying to get your participants to describe or narrate or profile, but actually much more about the role of you as a researcher trying to, I suppose, the responsibility that is the role of interpreting as opposed to just describing, and doing that with that sort of reflexive lens around how much of this you are co-constructing as well. So it's quite an in-depth approach, or an in-depth methodological. It's a real philosophy, actually. I think it's really, for me, it was quite a difficult one to wrap my head around. But it's about the depth of the entire what's the word I'm looking for? The complex interplay between the researcher and those who are involved in the research. Whereas that qualitative inquiry, I think, as you said, Amy, it's probably more about that initial layer of description without as much kind of interpretation, really, isn't it?
Yes, and with ethnography, like you need, I think it challenging that when you sort of try to separate that, what are the voices from the participants and how much that I interpret with through the lens as a researcher, definitely.
Yeah. That ethnography is definitely a whole other level.
Yeah.
Any other questions on those steps? I love that 6-step approach, particularly, at the stage when you're trying to develop a research proposal, particularly if it's for something like your master's, where you're submitting a proposal to show you have thought through all of these factors that are going to play out in your research as well. So having those 6 steps, if there was one slide to, cut out and stick to your board over your computer, I think that would be it so far today. Amy, that's super.
Thank you. So I think we've maybe have some time to have a group discussion. It's just give you some time to think about how you're going to apply this 6-step approach for a clinical education research study. And if you haven't have a topic in mind, I've got a topic to you. How and to what extent does interprofessional education impact collaboration skills among health professional students?
And just see if anybody might like to pop some current research ideas that they might like to chat about as well, if you want to pop them into the chat box. And maybe even a stab at what you're currently thinking in terms of methodology. As people are maybe thinking about that, Amy, can I ask you just to delve into just one of the points you made earlier that I think is really important, and it's about, I think when we jump into research as clinicians originally, and obviously everyone is trained in health professions around evidence-based medicine, and that real kind of clinical research approach, that is the truth. There is a fact, there is a truth to be sought from. Does this work? Doesn't it? In what cohort does this particular drug work, or does this particular quality of life measure, is it appropriate, or whatever it might be? And there's very much black and white approaches and answers to that as well. So for those of you taking a jump into qualitative research, it is not an insignificant jump. But I think, Amy, and you might have some comments on this, I think definitely what I see when I review papers is sometimes it's very obvious that this is somebody sort of dipping their toe into qualitative research, but they actually haven't thought through not just the alignment of the methodology or the method with the research question, but actually the philosophical assumptions inherent in that methodological approach as well. So you'll see people a lot of the time saying they're doing a phenomenological study, but actually the thing that I always laugh about when I see it is people will say, we did a qualitative study, it aligned with our research question, it was the way to answer it, but that you'll see a limitation section that says, oh, sorry, we did a qualitative study, so it's not generalizable. And I just want to just cry at that stage usually, because it's about the entire methodological approach being entirely appropriate. You don't need to apologize for it because it's not generalizable. And that's a real kind of marker of somebody who hasn't quite grappled with that philosophical, I suppose, challenge that it is to be able to engage with that messiness and the grey area You know, if there was one distinction for me between qualitative and quantitative research, it's often that ability to deal with the messiness and the grey as opposed to black and white. I don't know what you think, Amy, about that as well, and just that even articulating that sort of part of the alignment question.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it always annoys me when people are saying that they are doing qualitative interview or focus group and they come up with these themes, and then how many numbers of these themes and how many percentage of people are like are saying these themes. So I can understand that it is a challenge to jump from a mainly quantitative perspective to a qualitative perspective, but I think really think about what are you going to try to find out for your research. You're going to find out about how, and you're thinking about why that something happened, and it may be different, and you need to think about how it aligns to your values, to your views of how knowledge are being constructed. Because very black and white, yes, is a very scientific approach, but with qualitative research, is more about hearing from your participants, hearing from your perspective. So the role of the researchers and the participants is very important to think that about, because as a qualitative, I'm a mixed method, but I use a lot of qualitative research methods as well. And this is really giving the chance your participants to say, and my role is to learn from there, to really collect the data from there and interpret from their perspective how they see a specific phenomenon happening in a context.
Yeah, and actually, Natasha's just picked up on that about it's important to consider your own kind of worldview. And if your worldview is very much that there's a truth and a fact, that's not something to apologize for either. Yeah. That's a positivist worldview, and we haven't used those words yet. As a card-carrying constructivist, I have to say I'm very happy to deal with that lack of black and white. But I'm also interested in, particularly when you do research around particularly highly emotive issues for any reason, and we like to think that educational research isn't that highly emotional or emotive, but it often is. And being able to represent those narratives that aren't necessarily yours is challenging a lot of the time. And one other kind of, I suppose, just more something to think about in designing your research too, is if you really want to prove something, you really have to think about how you're going to do that and whether or not qualitative research is the way to do that. And oftentimes I will see that when people will design initiatives. And, you know, we talk a lot about the sort of proving that it worked by doing pre and post knowledge tests. And if there's one thing to take away from every webinar in this series, that's not really an educational research design for so many different reasons that we don't have time to get into today, but mostly because it's the question that isn't framed accurately or appropriately. If you just want to see did people's knowledge increase by handing them something they didn't know already, that's not a research, because you're not really understanding why and how, because you did what you did. That's not really interrogating if it was the approach that you used helped people to better understand something, or was it just the fact that they know something now that they didn't know beforehand. So with the question that you're asking and how you articulate and how you write down that question, and the reason we go and refine and refine and refine all the time is to make sure that as you're kind of working through these 6 steps, probably what you're doing is changing a research question slightly as you go along every time too, and trying to kind of really grapple with, okay, well, what am I going to be comfortable with at the end of this? Am I going to be comfortable with the fact that I may not find a truth to this and I can't just categorize, or I can't just profile something? Will I be able to describe what's going on? Will I be able to stand back from it? And what will I do if it comes out that, you know, the people I've spoken to have an entirely different perspective on this than I do? If you're very passionate about something and you have a very specific perspective on it, you have to be open to the fact that not everybody may not think that way as well. And, you know, your role as a researcher in that to represent that becomes really inherently important as well. But that was a bit of a preaching to the choir here, I think. Actually, somebody has a question here, Amy. What methodologies would be appropriate to consider for a study into the extent of medical school teaching on lifestyle factors like exercise and sleep, and students' understanding of how they affect health? Ooh, interesting. So what's your research question, Matthew? Could you pop that in while Amy's just thinking about that there?
Yeah, I want to pick up a couple of points from what you just said. So for education, it's really hard for us to prove something, because when you need to think about, yes, you have an intervention, you implement your intervention, but you can't 100% attribute or say that because of your intervention something happened, because there's so many other factors happening in the context of where your participants are living in. So that's why it's relatively fewer RCTs in educational intervention. So it's something to think about your research question. If it is clinical education, whether using a quantitative approach would be appropriate. And other things that I want to pick up on is, as a researcher, when we're doing qualitative research, is always a good habit to keep a log of yourself, of your thinking, of where when you start to think about your research questions, think about your methodology methods, go out and collect data, think about your role as a researcher and the extent of influence from your role in making those decisions. Because when you write a journal paper for qualitative studies, we always would like to see a paragraph about reflexivity, is about how you ensure that your role as a researcher, or understanding your role as a researcher in the impact of how you collect and interpret your data.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Okay, Matthew's just followed up here. Matthew, do you feel like turning on your mic and your camera at all? Are you able to where you are? Because I see that you don't really have a research question, but you're trying to, I suppose, so a couple of things in what you've written in the beginning is trying to look at the extent of medical school teaching on lifestyle factors and students' understanding of how they affect health. So even inherent in the students' understanding, what were you thinking of exploring within that heading of understanding? What does that look like, or what does that sound like to you?
I'm not sure. It's an idea that I have, but I've not pursued it at all.
Okay.
But it's something that I'd like to do. I guess what I mean by understanding is, what extent do they think there has been teaching on it, and how they would kind of implement that teaching into their practice later down the line.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of research questions in what you've written there, Amy. I don't know if you can see Matthew's note in the chat box, but there's probably a couple of research questions just in what you've written so far, Matthew. And as you're reading more and refining more, you'll see it. And really now, when you read those articles that you find, really look at the methodology and the methods that they've used to try and do this, and those philosophical assumptions. Because when you're trying to elicit students' understanding of how lifestyle factors affect health, I mean, you could do this in multiple different ways. You could do an MCQ, you could do surveys, you can do anything. And that will look at sort of their understanding of, from a medical point of view, from a knowledge point of view. But if you want to delve further into how that impacts, say, on how they then manage patients with certain conditions, how they advise patients with certain conditions, there are different pieces of work you could do in that sense as well. I would caution, we see a lot of studies where we ask people how much teaching they've had on something. They come back and say, we haven't had any. Then there's a recommendation at the end of the paper, oh, such and such needs to be included in the undergraduate curriculum. The reviewers for said paper then go, well, the undergraduate curriculum is completely overwhelmed. So how do you make decisions about what you put in and put out? So just because something isn't in a curriculum explicitly, that's not just a justification for putting it in. You have to delve a bit deeper. But also, students may not have understood, or may not have recognized that the teaching, say in this situation around lifestyle medicine, has actually been incorporated across an entire module, or whatever it might be, or that clinicians embed this into all of their teaching because that's where they're at. So just asking if people have had teaching on it can have its limitations as well. So I think what you need here is probably a really, really defined research question here to really understand what it is you want to know. Amy, can you see that now? Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I stopped sharing so that I can see the chat. And it's also really important to think about what you would expect to have it at the end. What was the aim of doing this research? It's like the so what question. So if you got have you done the research, what end up that you would like to have to benefits to the students or inform the teaching of the medical school?
Yeah, and then other people have done really kind of, big pieces of work as well, Matthew, say around curriculum reviews and content analyses of multiple different curricula to look at, which medical schools are incorporating lifestyle medicine as a topic in and of itself. And so you could look at the kind of spread of that. Lots of ways to do that as well, but would strongly suggest you go to a supervisor, not supervisor, but somebody who would guide you through that as well. If you're not taking it on as part of your master's or an intercalated degree or something like that, but try and find somebody to work with you around that too.
Yeah, thank you.
I didn't see any other. Let me just see if I see any other. No, I don't have any more there, Amy.
Yep.
Any other questions for Amy there? Amy, did you have more in terms of the slides that you wanted to go back to, or will we?
It's just about a discussion at the end of if colleagues would like to share where they're up to, or do you have any questions?
Perfect. Can I ask something actually? And again, more to get your thoughts on the other part for people. Again, is always when we talk about looking at all of these decision-making factors, and I mean decision-making in the context of what you're going to do in your study as well. The next question is usually, well, how do I reflect that in my paper? Where does this sit? What do I do with it? And you've all heard us all at this stage in this series talk about reflexivity more than once. But then people come to writing it and they go, well, where do I put that in exactly now? Where does that fit in a scientific article? Amy, I might ask you what your thoughts are on that. What do you generally do in terms of reflecting that in your writing?
I usually have a separate session, but do I have it at the end of the methods or at the beginning of doing the data analysis? Definitely in somewhere in there that talk about, I think it's important to let the readers know how you analyze your data and the themes that you're coming out. So definitely before I presenting the analysis.
Yeah, I think I tend to put it in even before that. And again, it varies. The one thing I would say is it varies with every journal, and how much they like you to delve into this. If you're writing a paper for medical education, they would absolutely expect to see that in, a relatively big amount of detail there as well. Not just in terms of the methodological choices that you've made, but actually why your position and your positionality matters in this particular context. So this is always that bit around having a passion for something that has to sustain you and your interest in this particular area. But also by being reflexive about where you're coming from on it allows you to also sort of be ready for that challenge when other people maybe don't agree with your particular view on something as well. So it allows you to kind of write that down, and just so you can kind of respect where it is. There are keywords we probably don't use in educational research, like bias. Okay, so people think about positionality and bias. And actually, what I suppose we've come to recognize in educational research and qualitative research specifically is that idea about being transparent about it, being reflexive about it. Just because you're a medical student researching something to do with medical students doesn't make you biased. It gives you a position, and it gives you a particular lens and a particular view. And that can be a key strength, particularly when it comes to qualitative research and connecting with your participants. But you just need to be articulate and transparent about that connection and the potential challenges of it as well. So you will see journal articles where that positionality, that reflexivity actually comes in as its own heading. And then, as Amy said, other people will put it in at the beginning of the methods. Sometimes at the beginning of the methods section, you're going to want to put in a context section anyway to really explain the context in which your study is actually taking place, recognizing that, say, Matthew, if you were looking at the teaching around lifestyle medicine, you can only comment on a particular medical school's context. So you have to be clear about what that is. And it could be that your medical school has been really proactive in embedding lifestyle medicine. That's been a key kind of driver for them over the last couple of years. So you have to explain that they may have more than another medical school might have. And that's the context bit that's really important. So somewhere around the context and your reflexivity, those two sections need to go in before you really kind of present what you've found as well. And that then allows that reader to understand in the discussion why you've kind of used the lens that you have, and also your theoretical framework if you're using one, and that's for another day's discussion. But these things need to foreground your methods and those data collection choices that you've made as well. Is that fair enough, Amy? Or would I think they all need to kind of go in, don't they, to really set the scene and the tone?
Yeah, and it's very important to point out that for qualitative research, there is no right or wrong answer. What we're looking at is your rationale, your justification, why you choose a particular view, and why that view would be appropriate to answer your research question. And I think when we think about writing papers, methods, I think methods session is the easiest way to start with your paper, and by going through answering the 6 steps that what we presented today, it would help you to frame your methodology session.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just keeping a check on the questions because I'll just keep asking them because I have so many questions for you, Amy. I don't see anything else at the moment. My one other I suppose comment, caution question was actually around, because Amy does a lot of mixed methods research as well. Again, when you're starting out, it's really important to recognize that mixed methods is not at all as straightforward as it seems. I think back in the day, 20 years ago, when again, educational research was kind of starting to really have its moment and to flourish as well, mixed methods kind of started out as being, oh, we'll do a survey and we'll do interviews and then we'll just mash them all up together. We now recognize that there is very much a science and a philosophy behind mixed methods research. And as Amy said, just to bring out Amy's point that's really, really important, is mixed methods isn't just about doing a couple of different pieces and mapping together what you found. It's very much about that what's the word I'm looking for? Very much about the flow between one and the other, how you're using one to inform the next stage. So it could be that you use, interviews or a focus group to inform your survey items or questions, or that you use your survey and within that you find that there are certain things coming out loudly that you want to delve into then in more depth, and you're using them to inform then your in-depth interviews. But it's very much an iterative process. It isn't just we'll piece them all together. And the other danger, just to be really, really clear about it as well, is what we often see with that kind of just mixed methods research that hasn't totally been thought through, is people salami slicing and trying to then publish the focus group survey or the focus group study as a separate thing, and then the survey as a separate thing. And it becomes clear that there's something missing because the disconnect is obvious. And then you can't be writing 2 separate papers around that, and it won't get published, because if you've used one to inform the other, they should be published as a single entity. You can't be pulling out papers out of those. But that's my own kind of soapbox,
Yep.
Amy. What do you think?
Yep, definitely. And I am the editor of the Review of Education, and it's really clear from an editor point of view, if you try to publish one bit of your study and not telling me the other bit, or saying that the other bit is a bigger study, yeah, that's probably not a good practice, definitely.
No. Yeah. No, for sure. So again, I think at an early stage, and again, this series is about getting started. Mixed methods is quite difficult to jump into. So I think getting to grips with the various different even qualitative choices that are out there is really important before you start mixing mixing methods. And I'm all for mixing. I'm all for mixing methodological mixing and borrowing, but you have to have a reason to do it. And you also have to have the knowledge and the expertise to know when and how to do that appropriately. And again, all of the time when it's appropriate for your research question.
Yeah, definitely. And justify why one single approach won't be sufficient to inform and answer your research question.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions on that? Okay. Amy, thank you. Did you have any last words for the group?
Think be brave and try different methodology and see which one that you enjoy most. And I think pick the topic that you really enjoy doing, because you will with your project at least if not more for 6 months or 12 months for master and for longer for PhD. So pick something that you're really passionate about. Yeah, so that's probably my suggestion. And all the very
Great.
best, everyone.
I think that bravery is so important, and curiosity.
Yeah.
You know, don't be afraid to be curious, particularly in, again, Matthew, how you ask that question, that it's a curiosity as opposed to proving a point, because those papers that are written from the lens of curiosity and that perspective are so different to ones where somebody's out to prove something as well. Huge thank you to Amy today, and to all of you for attending over your lunch breaks as well, particularly at a particularly busy time of the year, let's face it, for everybody. And I'm sure everyone's trying to get wrapped up with other bits and pieces, so I hope it's been useful. Just a note to always check the incubator website as well, as hopefully you know now, we have a directory on the website of people who are interested in various different aspects of qualitative, quantitative research at different levels, people who might be interested in supervising various different things and who have subject matter interests as well. So that directory is on the website, as are all the recordings from all of the Getting Started series as well. So you can always play them back. And once you I think if you've been to a few of these webinars, playing them all back at the end will make more sense, because I know we obviously do it in bite-sized pieces, but for you to see the connection between them and the order that we do them in as well is very much the order in which you kind of think about your study and you design your study as well. So very best of luck to you all, and I will be excited to hear at the next webinar about how those research questions are coming on. Hint, hint, Matthew. And we'll expect great things from that one. And to all of you, I wish you a very happy holiday season, whatever you are doing for it, and look forward to seeing you then in January.